Welcome to the Roost News Podcast, the place for all things volunteer. I'm Judee Barone, co-lead, and today we are speaking with Jennifer Feuerstein-Divita, Senior Associate Director for Community Outreach at the AARP Michigan State Office. And we're speaking about the Learn Latte series. Welcome, Jennifer, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Judee. I'm thrilled to be here.
So before we begin, could you just introduce yourself a little bit and about your position at AARP?
Yeah, so I've been in my role doing community outreach for 12 and a half years. When I started AARP, this is what I was hired to do, and I've been doing it for 12 and a half years. Absolutely love it. And I work on the west side of the state of Michigan and focus on the community presence of Greater Grand Rapids.
Very good. So getting to the program or the series itself, how did Learn a Latte begin and what was its purpose?
So funny story. It was first an idea that I had pitched to my volunteers because they said, we want to do something on a regular basis where we can get older adults together for conversation and drinks and, learn from each other. So I had pitched this idea of doing like a coffee series. And my lead volunteer laughed. He's like, coffee? We don't want coffee. We want to drink beer. And so we ended up launching AARP on Tap, which is a whole different podcast that we can talk about. But at one of the On Tap events, somebody said, would you ever consider doing like a speaker series? Maybe we could have somebody come in and talk about funerals and burials. And we all got a good chuckle out of that because we thought it's probably not the right venue and the right atmosphere to be doing an On Tap beer brewery event and have somebody coming in and talking about funerals. So we got a little bit of a chuckle out of that. So we then reconvened and said, we got On Tap launched, we got that off the ground, and then we came back and said, let's start with this educational series now with coffee, which was where the idea had originated. So we launched this speaker series and we wanted to name it something that was very just witty and catchy, and so we called it Learn a Latte.
Excellent. And so since, excuse me, so when the program was initially instituted, it was in person. At any point, did you do it virtually for individuals who maybe couldn't travel?
So we launched it as an in-person event in 2017, and we only did it in person at that time. And we held it on a once a month basis. And then 2017, 18, 19, we were in person, and then for 2 months in person in 2020. And then of course, pandemic hit and we shifted to virtual, and we held it virtually for 2.5 years. And I think even a little bit longer. It was well into 2023 that we were still doing it virtually. So I would say about 3 years that we shifted it virtually and only held it virtually. And then we really wanted to start getting back out into the community, bringing people together, because there's just that connection that is so different in person. So we returned to doing it in person. We shifted the way that it looked a little bit. There were a number of reasons for that. One of them, this lead volunteer that I was referencing who launched the On Tap series, he had passed away during the pandemic. So we lost our lead volunteer who was very instrumental in getting Learn a Latte off the ground and all of the speakers and the venues. So when he passed away, we really needed to restructure this. And so we shifted to a different location. The location that we were doing it at was a bookstore. And after the pandemic, they didn't want to host any more in-person events in their bookstore.
Sure.
So we had that happen, and then we started partnering with the library, and then we shifted again. So there was just after the pandemic, things just really took a different turn with Learn a Latte that we were constantly adapting to. And then we shortened it down to being once a quarter instead of once a month. So there were periods of it being both in person and virtually. We never did it as a hybrid, though. It was either one or
Hmm.
the other.
So you talk about a couple things there. One is the volunteers, and one is collaborating with other organizations. So let's start with the volunteers who, as you said, are so key and essential. What were their roles, if they had any, to the program's implementation, as you sort of mentioned, and from that point on?
So I had a core team that worked on developing the topics. They would first come up with like a big laundry list of topics. That core team then would take it to the larger volunteer team, and we would narrow it down to the 12 topics if we did it monthly, or the 4 topics if we did it quarterly. And then that core team of volunteers, they would be the ones to go out and secure the speakers. They would do the research or ask the questions of who would be the right person at the table, and they would secure the speakers. And then they were also the ones that got the coffee, did the registration, did the setup, did the tear down. That was in person. When it was virtual, they still managed the topics and got the speakers. And then for the virtual events that we did, then they would manage the chat, they would post the links, they would do welcoming remarks. So little different roles depending on
Hmm.
whether it was virtually or in person. And then as far as the community collaboration, as I mentioned, we started doing it at a local bookstore, and that's where we hosted until the pandemic. And then after the pandemic, when they didn't want to host any more events, we went back to the drawing board and decided to reach out to our county library system. And
Hmm.
they were fantastic as far as wanting to work with us and using their library locations to host it. And what we started doing then is we rotated to the different locations around the county because they wanted to get people into the doors of their different libraries. So we used them for that, and then they also would promote the event in their monthly guidebook, which was huge as far as like having this partner, having this community collaborator on board, and they would help promote it as well. So there were definitely pros and cons to this style of working with the different locations. When we had it at the bookstore, it was always at the same location, which there was never any guesswork. Even for us as staff or volunteers, we knew exactly where we were going. It was always the same person, the point of contact. The people that came, the attendees, the guests, they knew where to park, they knew where to go. So it took out all of the guesswork. When we changed to using the library system, then all of a sudden there's new questions. And every time we would go to a new library, it was, well, where are we setting up and who's the point of contact and where do people park and how do they find it? So that it created a lot of guesswork that was eliminated by having it at the same location every time. The other thing too is when we started working with the library system, because they promoted this as, you know, a program that they offered at the library, they wanted to manage their own registration. So anybody that registered through the library registered through them, and then when we marketed it and promoted it, then people registered through us.
Right.
It was a little clunky, but that's how they wanted to do it because they wanted to manage their own system if people registered through the library. And so when people would come, the guests would come, there were essentially like 2 registrations that were taking place, which wasn't ideal, but we got more people in the doors too. So, you know, those are the trade-offs that we had to work with.
Sure. Excuse me. You mentioned the topics and securing the speakers. How did that go as far as did the volunteers help you, or did you do that? How did you get those topics and speakers?
So really it was the volunteers that the core team, they would come together and they would talk about the things that were just maybe coming up in you know society, like what are things that are, you know, we need to know about. Like for example, during 2020, during the census year, that was like a topic, like how do we educate people on what they need to know about the census? So things that were relevant to the moment, current events. But then they also did things that were maybe personal and relevant to them. Like if somebody had heart issues, do we need to have somebody come in from the American Heart Association and talk about heart health? So there were things that were current events. There were things that were personal to people. And then there were things that were just curious. People were curious about. So they would come up with that laundry list and then present it to the larger volunteer team. And then everybody would vote. And based on the votes, then those were the topics that got put into circulation. And then it came back to me for final approval because I wanted to make sure that the topics were relevant to AARP audiences, weren't too wayward. And then I also wanted to make sure that they somehow tied into AARP. Especially now with this initiative of offline to online, there's even more importance to ensure that the topics are related to AARP so that we can draw those audience members to our online resources. So if it's a topic that we can draw them and direct them to, then it makes it even more important for us to use that as a topic.
Excellent. And let me see here. So if another state office wanted to start a Learn a Latte type program, what sort of tips or suggestions would you offer them in planning and getting it organized?
So I would say make sure that you've got diverse topics because there's just something for everybody out there then. And if you just narrow it too much to a limited topic, then you're going to lose a lot of people. So it's really important to have that diversity in topics so that everybody feels like they're learning something new. As I just shared, tie it in with AARP content. It doesn't mean that exactly has to be AARP an initiative, but somehow we can bring that back in so that we can direct people to other resources that AARP has. Other tips that I would recommend when it comes to like getting re-engagers, you can do fun things like have a passport book so that people are getting like a stamp in their passport book each time they come. And then when they reach like different levels, then they can get different swag. And then they feel like they've got this like accomplishment because they've got all the stamps in their passport books. That's something that I would recommend doing. And you can even tie that swag into the topic. So we had a topic on travel, like traveling on a shoestring, and we got AARP branded luggage handles. So they were like these felt quilted handles that you put on your luggage. And so we tied in that. Now, not every topic can be tied back to swag, but it just adds a little bit of like funness, a fun factor to it. And then also don't be afraid to adapt. There's a lot of learning that goes along with this. Some topics just don't work. They fall flat. Other topics are going to be through the roof, but you don't want to do overkill with the same topic. So you have to just kind of find out what works with your audience. As I shared, working with different partners brings different pros and cons. So you have to test the waters with something new and figure out what works for your community because every community will be very different.
Excellent tips and excellent topics. Very engaging from what you're telling me.
Yes. Yeah. So some of the topics, if you want to talk about topics, we, like I said, went with a variety of topics. And of course, the top ones were things related to fraud, to brain health and dementia, and technology. So those were our three top topics. And we also built them out so that they always had a little bit of a catchy title, something that would be engaging. So we had, these are some of the topics that we had: navigating the senior care maze, travel on a shoestring, tips and savings for your next trip, downsizing or decluttering when you've got too much house, beyond broccoli, whole foods and diets, can't find a parking place, getting around downtown, don't want to move in with your kids, housing options for older adults. This one was a cute one. My car keys are in the fridge, when to worry when you start to forget,
Right.
Another one, staying alive when before the paramedics arrive, and new
Yeah.
rules of the road, understanding driver safety. So those are just some of the topics that we had, and we always created, again, a catchy title, something that was intriguing to people to learn more.
Excellent. Very good. Before we sign off, is there anything else you want to mention about the series that I didn't ask you about?
Yeah, so just a few different things here.
Sure.
One was the format of the series that we had. So we hosted it on Wednesday morning. We called it our Wednesday morning speaker series. It was the third Wednesday of every month, and it was from 10 to 11:30 in the morning. We had a coffee bar and a continental breakfast. So that's how we tied in the latte with it, was with the coffee
Sure.
bar. And we had different types of syrups and different milks and different coffee flavors. So people got to have like this coffee bar and build their own coffee. And then we did a continental breakfast. And we also, with that, did like a charcuterie board breakfast, which was a huge hit. Of course,
Wow.
if you feed them, people come. So you know, bring the food on. And it was always an hour and a half when it was in person. And we had typically about two speakers. Now, sometimes we would have maybe just one, depending on the topic, or three, but typically it was two speakers. And then we split that hour and a half up with like one speaker talking for about 35 minutes, and then the other one for 35. And then you had some time built in there for introductions, switching the computer slides,
All
allowing
right.
people to get their coffee, ask questions, that type of thing. I always encourage the presenters to use some type of visuals like the slides, presentations, or prop,
Hmm.
because it keeps the audience engaged. It's really hard to sit there for an hour and a half and just listen to a talking head the whole time.
Sure.
And people just learn, sometimes people learn better visually. So I always made sure that there was some type of visual component for them to learn from. One of the things too, that maybe that this is a tip, is that sometimes people would ask questions during the presentation, and what would
Hmm.
happen is the presenter would get thrown off, because people would, especially when it comes to fraud, everybody wants to tell a story about how they know somebody that's been affected by fraud, or they are a victim of fraud. And so people would start telling their stories, and then all of a sudden 20 minutes passes and the speaker has not gone through his content. And we wanted to show the respect to the speaker to be able to talk and get through his presentation. So we really encouraged people to hold off on their questions until
Hmm.
the end, because one, the speaker might get to it in the
Sure.
presentation, and two, we didn't want to run out of time for the speaker to be able to present. And then the other thing too is sometimes people would get into personal information that was irrelevant to the other audience members, and you didn't
Sure.
want to take away from their experience. So we just
Right.
always asked that the speaker, or that the guests and the audience members would hold off until the end of the presentation with their questions, or wait until the event ended, and then they could ask the speaker one-on-one.
Right.
And we did it virtually. We did it as a 30-minute show instead of an hour and a half, because that was the sweet spot for people to be able to, their attention span. They can only be on for 30 minutes. They don't want to do more than that. So 30 minutes was the sweet spot. And then we had people ask their questions in the chat. We had no live questions, and the volunteers would manage that. And then we only had one speaker when we did it virtually, because the time period was so much shorter. So those are a little bit of the nuances between the format of the series, doing it in person and virtually. And then the marketing piece of this. So
Hmm.
what I would recommend for state offices to do is to have the entire series lined up at the very start.
Hmm.
That doesn't necessarily mean that they know who their speaker is going to be or what the coffee is going to be. But if you have the date and you have the topic, then you can create a postcard for the entire year that you can mail out at the start of the year, so that people can get those dates on their calendar if it's a topic of interest to them.
Sure.
and then have the flyers ready to go at events so that every time you're at an event, you've got it to hand out to people. People can get it on their calendars early. You've got more re-engagers with this, and it just keeps everything organized. As each event starts to unfold, then you get the speakers lined up. Then you might have to confirm the location. We would have the locations always established, but sometimes when you're that early out, things change. Like one of the libraries was under construction when the time came for us to have our event there. So we just sent out an email saying the location has changed. So we would have our locations in place, but we also knew that there needed to be flexibility on that. But if you had the date and you had the topic, then your series could be marketed at the very start of the year with that. So it was just a great way to manage this series. And then we also then set it up as a C-Vent series so that when the attendees registered, they could pick and choose which ones they wanted to attend. And then if they were repeat engagers, then we got the credit for each person, even if they were the same person. You know, we got the credit and the numbers for them and the data for them. And then let's see what else might be helpful to know. I think if I had to do it over again, I would keep it centralized to one location because of the things that I mentioned, where it would become more difficult working with the different locations, the point of contacts. People don't know where they're going, and they also might not want to go to that side of town because they just aren't familiar with it. They don't know it. But keeping it at the same location, once somebody came once and it was a rubber stamp for them to attend it again and again. So that was definitely helpful in keeping the consistency and keeping the numbers up. So it was a great event for us. We sunset it just at the end of last year, only because we wanted to branch out and try new things, and we only had so much capacity to keep doing this and bring on new stuff. So we really thought long and hard about this. And then the other thing too is that there was a partner organization in the community that was doing something similar to this, where they were now bringing in speakers on a monthly basis, having it at the same location, and they were bringing in about 150 people a month for this. And so we decided that the opportunity for us was to sponsor it. And they also then blew it out even more, where they had vendor tables. And so as a part of the sponsorship, AARP is a vendor at their monthly speaker series. And then it allows us to know what the topic is, bring AARP related content to that. We have volunteers with their red showing up. We still have like our presence in this senior speaker series. It's just not AARP doing the work and hosting it.
Well, very good. I mean, the whole series, the logistics, the marketing, and plus the coffee. I love that. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for speaking with us today. Really appreciate it. And thank you to our audience, as always. Please visit and like the Roost News Podcast on YouTube and your favorite audio platform. Share the podcast with your colleagues. On behalf of the Roost News Podcast team, we thank you.